Jonathan, would you like to offer prayer for us this morning?
Heavenly Father, we thank you that we can gather here together this morning in this classroom to come together to study your word. Please be with us with the Holy Spirit. Bless us when we open your word and teach us the things which we need to know to come to get a closer connection to you. We thank you for everything, and please be with us in the name of Jesus. Amen.
So as I promised yesterday, we're going to go through the chronology of the three decrees in a little bit more detail than we often have looked at them. And in trying to formulate how I'm going to get through everything, they've given me Sunday as well. So basically what we have is we have today, and then we have 2 classes tomorrow, but one is really focusing upon the content of Samuel Snow's letters in the afternoon. And then on Thursday, I'm going to deal with placing that chronology on a line. And then on Sabbath, I have the sermon where I'm going to deal a bit more with that. So some of what we've done in the class obviously is going to be in the sermon for people who haven't been able to come to the morning classes. And then on Sunday, we're going to look at some of the questions that come from understanding Samuel Snow's letters. So we're going to, because I know there's going to be questions and there's going to be things that we want to discuss in the class to sort of work out. And then on the final Wednesday afternoon class next week, we're going to take more time to look at some of the things that we haven't had time to look at, dealing with the letters. And that's going to be some of the more specific chronology of the relationship between those letters and other dates. So that's how I sort of plan it. We'll see how it actually happens. So what we want to do here in looking at the chronology, I want to first just address a standard reform line, because we are going to look at this as a reform line, obviously, because it is. But when we look at a reform line, we know we have a period of darkness, and that the darkness is an era that has arrived through a series of a progressive destruction of 4. There's 4 generations, and it's in the 4th generation that this period of darkness begins. And then we have a time of the end with an increase of light. And the time of the end, we'll often look at it like, we'll just say the first message arrives. And then we have this way mark here, which we would call the formalization. So the first message would formalize. And then we would have the first message being empowered in this history. And after the empowerment, we would have what happens next. I guess I should do it. We have a foundations laid, right? So we have the foundations. And this is followed by, so we got the enemies, the activities of the enemies that occur after the foundations are laid. And we're not going to deal with the rest of the reform line here yet, but we got to keep this in mind as we look at this history, because this is the reform line of the first 3 decrees. Now, we do know that within each of the decrees, or each of the messages, there are elements that exist within the larger reform line. So you could look at Cyrus's decree as a reform line by itself. And we could look at the 2nd decree as a reform line by itself. We could look at the 3rd decree as a reform line by itself. And we have at different times. So in trying to understand these, we've sometimes skipped over some of the details. And those details exist in chronology. So let's look in your book on page 57, chapter 9, the chronology of the various books of the Bible. And we just touched on this briefly yesterday. And we dealt with Cyrus's decree. Now we know that Cyrus's decree happened sometime when? When did it happen? It doesn't say here in these notes exactly. Well, it's in the first year of his reign, so that's not in his accession year. And the first year of his reign begins on March 31st, 536 BC. And we know from Daniel chapter 10 that the decree did not happen before the 24th day of the first month, because Daniel's praying for 3 full weeks. We could turn there, I guess, Daniel, but we're also going to be looking at Ezra, of course. But in Daniel chapter 10, in verse 4, it says, "And in the 24th day of the month, I was by the side of the great river Hiddekel." And it's at that time that he's informed about this battle that's been going on. And that battle is really Cyrus deciding to allow the Jews to go back to Jerusalem. And we know in chapter 11, when it says, "Also I in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and strengthen him," this is now saying this also occurred at what time? When did this occur? What is this referring? What occurred in the first year of, or in the first year of Darius the Mede? And why is it called the first year too? So this is Darius the Mede, right? And so in the first year of Darius the Mede, what is happening?
Cyrus has conquered Babylon for Darius. As its general.
So Babylon's going to be conquered here.
Yeah. 538.
Yeah, now it's called the first year because Darius is already king of Media, so he's been reigning for a long time. But he becomes the king of Babylon, right? Cyrus then becomes the king of Babylon after Darius dies. But in Daniel chapter 11, it's called the third year of Cyrus. So why would the first year of Cyrus being king of Babylon be called the first year or the third year? So why would his first year that he becomes king of Babylon be called his third year? Because, yeah, so Cyrus has been ruling for a long time.
First year of sole ruling.
Yeah, so it's first year of his sole rule. So we can find that in Ezra, he calls it his first year. So this is the first year, but it's also his third year. And why is it his third year?
He's the one who conquered Babylon.
He's the one who conquered Babylon, so it's the third year since he conquered Babylon. And when they conquer territories, he's not called the king of Babylon. Cyrus is not called the king of Babylon until Darius dies. But he is called king of lands. So there are different titles that they have because there's different territories. So Cyrus was given some things when Babylon fell. He's been the king of Persia for a long time. Darius was the king of Media for a long time. But how they number it depends on what they're counting. So here, when we talk about the first year of Cyrus, in Ezra, we know that it's the same as the third year of Cyrus in Daniel chapter 11. Right? Or Daniel chapter 10, verse 1, in the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia. And that confuses people, because some people just think, well, it should be the same. But it just depends where you're counting from. Okay? So that point I wanted to make clear. Now we know Babylon fell October 13th, 539 BC. And this is actually, the Jewish year began on September 28th, 539. So Babylon fell in the Jewish year 538. Right? So when it says 538 BC for the fall of Babylon on the charts, we just know that's a fall to fall year. It's not that we're rejecting what's on the charts. We accept 538. We just understand it in the same way that we understand 1843 on the 1843 chart, that it represents a spring to spring year. So we know that both calendars need to be understood, both the spring to spring and the fall to fall, because both are used in the Bible. And we know that Ezra, when he relates to Artaxerxes' decree, is using a fall to fall year, not a spring to spring year. So when he's even though Artaxerxes himself counts his reign spring to spring, Ezra in chapter 7, when they get the decree from Artaxerxes, it's before the first day of the first month. But that decree is given in the 7th year of Artaxerxes. So he's counting the 7th year of Artaxerxes as beginning in the fall, not beginning on the first day of the first month, because they leave Babylon with this decree on the first day of the first month, still in the 7th year of Artaxerxes. And I know we went over that, but I just wanted to clarify that. So it's part of the thing that creates this complication. Now we do have a chart below that illustrates some of this, and it shows the fall of Babylon, and you can see that the dates that I put here, these years, 538, 539, these are on the Julian calendar, so it's aligned pretty much with our Gregorian calendar. And then we have the reign of Cyrus, and you can see that we're starting Cyrus's count in the spring of 538. So that means Cyrus has an accession year that begins, but if you're going to count his reign from the fall of Babylon, you don't just count it from the day Babylon fell, you count it from the spring. Because the Persian kings, just like the Babylonian kings, always counted their reigns in the spring. And so you can see that I put there Darius right below there, and you can see that Darius has an accession year, which is 539. And then again, Darius is going to count his title as king of Babylon, because he becomes king of Babylon when Babylon falls. His first year of being king of Babylon is in the spring of 538. And then his second year of being king of Babylon is the year 537. And it's in that year that he dies. And when he dies, Cyrus succeeds to the throne. So Cyrus then has an accession year. He doesn't count as soon as he becomes king of Babylon, he doesn't count that as his first year. He waits till the next year. So you can see we actually have two different counts for Cyrus. The spring of 536 starts both the third year of Cyrus and the first year of Cyrus. And there are a number of reasons why we place the fall of Babylon in the fall of 539. But some of them have to do with Ellen White's statements, because she tells us that from the decree of Cyrus to the decree of Darius is more than 20 years. But she tells us from when they arrive to Jerusalem and the decree of Darius is less than 20 years. So one is we can place very specifically the decree of Cyrus. But she also tells us that it's 2 years, how does she say? Within about the space of 2 years from the time that Darius, from the time Babylon falls and Darius comes to the throne of Babylon. It's within about the space of 2 years that Cyrus comes to the throne. So there's this space of about 2 years. So if we were to put, as some people do, the fall of Babylon in 538, then Ellen White would be calling a space that's less than 1 year within about the space of 2 years, because we have to keep her statements consistent. So the main reason why I've placed things where I have has to do with Ellen White's statements on chronology. And she says some things that nobody else says and nobody else tells us. Though it is interesting that I was reading a book where a guy goes through the chronology of the fall of Babylon and Cyrus' accession exactly the same way that I understand it. And he uses exactly the same phrase that Ellen White uses within about the space of 2 years to describe from when Babylon falls to when Cyrus comes to the throne. So to me, just that language suggests that it has to be within about the space of 2 years. It can't be 1 year.
So doesn't that statement also to say that about is nearly to, but not necessarily complete to?
Yes, so it's within about the space. So what that would tell me is there's 2 years, and it's within that. It's not more. It's not like with a whole bunch of time more, and it's not, 1 year and a bit, because it's in about the space of 2 years. She's being actually very precise in a way when you say about, because if you said about 2 years, but if you say within about 2 years, you're kind of limiting that it's not some wide space between those things. Okay, so what's confusing?
How we get the? I know it's just my brain, but how we get the 2 years leading to 536?
Well, Babylon falls in 539. Within about the space of 2 years, Cyrus succeeds to the throne of Babylon. This is in Patriarchs and Prophets, and it's in your notes somewhere, I think. It should be, if it isn't. Yeah. And then she says, and then we know there's a period of time. So Cyrus comes to the throne. He doesn't just come to the throne at the beginning of his first year. He has an accession year. And so since Babylon fell in the fall, so Babylon fell in the fall, Cyrus comes to the throne within about the space of 2 years. So he probably came to the throne in the fall, and there would be a period of about 6 months before he actually issues the decree. And if you look at what happens when these events happen, these transitions, and you look at the logistics of how these empires are run, things don't actually happen really quickly. So there is a process of time that has to happen. When Cyrus becomes king, there is no internet. They can't just text everybody. They will actually travel around and sort of secure their kingdom and make sure everybody's accepting what's happening. So they don't just become king and everybody knows they're king, right? Because it takes time to know that Darius has died. And you can see this in documents, where documents will sometimes be dated based upon a king still reigning, even though he's dead, because nobody knows it yet, right? So a transition has happened. Okay, so understanding this, there is a process of time that happens from when Cyrus comes to the throne after Darius has died, before he issues a decree, and it's about the space of 6 months. And so we know he issues this decree in the fall, and we talked about some of this chronology. So let's look at this. We have the first event, so let's turn to Ezra and try to go through this slowly. I don't like to rush through these things. So we know in Ezra chapter 1, it talks about in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. So this is talking about what Daniel calls the third year, right? These are the same year that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it also in writing. So we know that this is in the first year, and it has to be sometime after the 24th day of the first month because of Daniel chapter 10. And so there's a whole bunch of things that happen here. So I don't know how to go through this. Let's read verses 5 to 11. Alyssa, do you want to read those?
All of them?
Yeah.
Okay. Then rose up the chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, with all of them whose spirit God had raised, to go up to build the house of the Lord which is in Jerusalem. And all that they had, and all they that were about them strengthened their hands with vessels of silver, with gold, with goods, and with beasts, and with precious things beside all that was willingly offered. Also Cyrus the king brought forth the vessels of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth out of Jerusalem, and had put them in the house of his gods. Even those did Cyrus king of Persia bring forth by the hand of Mithridates the treasurer, and numbered them to Shebazar, the prince of Judah. And this the number, and this is the number of them: 30 chargers of gold, 1,000 chargers of silver, 9 and 20 knives. 30 basins of gold, silver basins, a second sort 410, and other vessels 1,000. All the vessels of gold and of silver were 5,400. All these did Sheshbazzar bring up with them of the captivity that were brought up from Babylon unto Jerusalem.
Okay, thank you. So these vessels, when did they leave Jerusalem? Or when did they get to Babylon? That maybe is a better question. So Nebuchadnezzar, when Daniel, so it's in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, which we say goes from the fall of 607 to the fall of 606. And if Daniel was taken captive in the fall of 607, the vessels and all these would have arrived at Babylon in the spring of 606. And now they're leaving Babylon in the spring of 536. How many years is that from 606 BC to 536 BC? So there's 70 years for the vessels, right? Because there's a, and so when we look at 536 and 606, many people date that as the 70 years of the Babylonian captivity. But we said that Daniel was taken captive in the fall of 607, and Ellen White says that Cyrus' accession to the throne marks the completion of the 70 years from when the first Hebrews were carried away captive to Babylon. So we know that the 70 years begin in the fall of 607, which is in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, which goes fall 607 to fall 606, and that the 70 years end in the fall of 537, but that they don't get the decree to go back to Jerusalem until the spring of 536. So if we wanted to say 606 and 536, we can, because those are correct. The only thing is when we were dealing with 677 to 607, it's much more convenient to talk about that as 607 instead of 606, because you can clearly see it's 70 years from the first of the 7 times commencing and the second 7 times commencing. So people sometimes have an issue with calling 606, the Jewish year 606, looking at it on our calendar, Daniel's captivity as being 607. So I hope that's clear to everyone, that we can look at these dates different ways. And we looked at the 70 years of the temple. So we know the temple was destroyed in August of 586, and it was rebuilt 70 years and 7 months later on March 12th, 515 BC. And if you counted from 586 to 515, it would count as 71 years. But if you look at the Jewish year, that Jewish year, it says it's in the 3rd day of the 12th month, which is Adar, and that it's completed before the next Jewish year begins. So sometimes I will say that the temple is built in 516 BC, because then you go 586 to 516 is 70 years. It's in the Jewish year 516, which ends in the spring. So sometimes we're counting spring to spring years, sometimes we're counting spring to fall, or fall to fall years, and sometimes we're talking about years on our calendar. And it can be confusing at times. But if we just know that we're looking at different calendars, then we can see why we have the different counts. Okay, so often we give dates in our calendar. If we're giving a date in our calendar, we're going to call, January. If it's in January, we're going to call it whatever year that is. But sometimes we may be giving a date on a Jewish calendar, then we need to date it that way. And I try to be consistent, but I'm not always consistent because people aren't consistent with these dating systems. So what's the first activity that we noted yesterday that happens, and it's in your notes, when they get to Jerusalem? What's the first thing that's noted? And it's in chapter 3. Let's go there. And when the 7th month was come, the children of Israel were in the cities, and people gathered themselves together as one man to Jerusalem. And then in verse 6, it says, from the first day of the 7th month began they to offer burnt offerings unto the Lord, but the foundation of the temple of the Lord was not yet laid. And if we read verse 3, they set an altar upon his bases for the fear of them, for the fear was upon them because of the people. Right. So what happens in the 7th month?
People gathered.
Right. So they're in Jerusalem, they set up an altar, and they begin on the first day of the 7th month to offer burnt offerings. So if we look at the chronology of this, I mean, it's in 536 BC, right? September 4th on our calendar. So we're going to note when we look at the Jewish calendar, the dates are going to be different in different years because of the lunar month. The months on the Jewish calendar are based upon the moon. So they're going to shift here and there. But the first day of the 7th month is Rosh Hashanah. That's the head of the year. That's the date that they usually use to begin the year in the fall. If they begin the year in the spring, it's on the first day of the first month. So the first day of the 7th month is always the 7th month. So if the year begins in the fall, they never call the 7th month the first month. They just started in the 7th month because the count always goes from the spring. Now they haven't, at this point, begun to lay the foundation of the temple, and we're going to look at that. But let's look at chapter 4 now. So can you read, Olivine, can you read chapter 4, verse 4 to 6?
Then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and troubled them in building, and hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, wrote they unto him an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem.
Okay, thanks. But actually, we shouldn't have read that first. We need to read chapter 3, verse 8. That's what we need to read first.
Now in the 2nd year of their coming unto the house of God at Jerusalem, in the 2nd month, began Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, and the remnant of their brethren, the priests and the Levites, and all they that were come out of the captivity unto Jerusalem, and appointed the Levites from 20 years old and upward to set forth the work of the house of the Lord.
Okay. So here's Cyrus's decree somewhere here, right? So it's sometime after. They travel, during this period, it takes about 4 months to go from Babylon to Jerusalem. And we know here, on the first day of the 7th month, they build an altar and they begin to offer burnt offerings. And so when do they begin to lay the foundation of the temple? So this is now the 2nd year and the 2nd month. So somewhere in here, they start to lay the foundation. And then, after we lay the foundation, we have the work of the enemies. So that means that in this reform line, if we're going to look at it here, when is the time of the end? If we're going to look at the time of the end over here. So we have a period of darkness here. So we're going to have the time of the end. So this is the captivity. And remember, the reform line always responds to the period of darkness. So this is the darkness of the captivity. So the reform line is going to answer whatever this darkness is. And it answers it by having them come out of captivity and return to Jerusalem. But where would you place the time of the end? Where did we always place the time of the end before?
Fall of Babylon, the fulfilling of the prophecy.
Okay. So where did we always place it before in the past? Okay, we didn't place it at the fall of Babylon before. That's new. We always placed it at the first decree. That's where we would used to place the time of the end. Right, Tyler?
It's been a while.
We used to do that. We didn't, for some reason, we didn't look at the fall of Babylon as at the time of the end, or at least we didn't think about them as being a separate event. For many people, the fall of Babylon and Cyrus and Darius were just together. We weren't looking at them in detail. And you would see when we just placed the time of the end there, it's just kind of Cyrus is the time of the end, and his decree, it just all happens at once. And we would, for many people, and you'll still find this, that many people look at Cyrus as having Babylon fall, and they don't even consider Darius the Mede as important or anything. They just say Cyrus caused Babylon to fall, and then right away he gives a decree. So you'll see people who put those all together. They just put them all together as one event. Babylon falls, Cyrus gives a decree, and right away they go back. They don't even recognize the 2 years. Many people who, not Adventists usually, but people who just read the Bible, some people don't know who Darius is. They make all kinds of stories that Darius is actually Cyrus, different theories about it, but Darius is Cyrus's uncle. And he makes an agreement with him that when he dies, Cyrus he will become king of all of Media and Persia. But at that time, when Babylon falls, there's 2 kingdoms that have been working together. So Cyrus is Persian, but he's also Median, right? And this is these 2 kingdoms, in a sense, become combined. Even though they still are kind of Medio-Persia, they don't have the 2 kings operating at the same time after Darius dies. But at that time, they are a 2-horn power when they first arise. So we've come to understand, and sometimes we look at both of these as kind of a time of the end. But if we put this as the time of the end, this parallels well other reform lines like 1798. What happens in 1798 that marks the time of the end? Fall of spiritual Babylon, right? So obviously the fall of literal Babylon is a type of the fall of spiritual Babylon. And so the two should parallel each other. Now we know that we also parallel this with 1989. And in 1989 we have the event which is the fall of the Soviet Union, which is really the fall of the wall that divides East and West Germany. That's kind of the event that we look at. And we know at that time who was the president of the United States? When the wall fell. Bush was, right. But we mark Reagan and Bush together, right? Now here do we have Darius and Cyrus together in 539? Cyrus is the general who goes in and actually takes over. So we have the two together marked in 539, and we have two together marked because in 1989, of course, Reagan is still president technically until Bush takes office in January. So, there's some things that, people disagree about, but one thing that we can see is that obviously the time of the end has to be when Darius becomes king of Babylon, when Cyrus goes into Babylon and kills Belshazzar.
The line that you're talking about is actually the line of Nehemiah that was placed on the reformatory lines. So it was seen as in the light of Nehemiah. I'm just looking at it, the reformatory line that you were talking about, that it was placed at time of the end with the fall of Babylon. It's the line of Nehemiah.
The line of Nehemiah.
Yes, it's saying right here, it says Nehemiah, right on the chart.
Oh, they call this the line of Nehemiah?
Yeah, that's what they did at first. So I see in the light of that, and I can see
Oh,
why
okay.
they would place it on that way.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure why they call this the line of Nehemiah. Because Nehemiah is not until the fourth decree.
That's what they were focusing on the fourth degree, like on the fourth angel's message.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so they used to call this the line of Nehemiah instead of the line of the three decrees. Now, so we have this time of the end. So when would we have the formalization of, so the first message would arrive? Would you agree with me here? So the first message arrives. So when would we have the message formalized? I know not everybody always thinks this way, but okay, when's it empowered? First message is empowered where? That's easy. At the decree, right? And how do we know that this is the empowerment of the first message? Or maybe I'm wrong, maybe you got a better idea. We know the foundation is laid over here. Now it doesn't have to be laid right here at this moment, right? The moment that the message is empowered, the foundation doesn't have to be laid at that moment, does it?
First of all, you have an angel come down, you have Gabriel, and you also have Jesus.
Right. So here, she has some really good arguments. So we have, this is Daniel chapter 10. So this is definitely an empowerment of this message would be here. But the foundation doesn't get laid until the next year. But still, you have to have the empowerment first before the foundation is laid. So the formalization I would have here, you got the accession of Cyrus. So him coming to the throne is obviously necessary in order for the message to be empowered. So he comes to the throne. He is now, and why would this be the formalization? Do we have any prophecy at all that would point to this person as being, because who formalizes the message in Millerite history? William Miller. And he's God's chosen messenger. Who's God's chosen messenger in this history? Cyrus is. How do we know? Right, in Isaiah, Cyrus is the Lord's anointed. Right? So Cyrus is the one who causes Babylon to fall. It says, I shall open before him the two leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. And so the accession of his throne, so even though he causes Babylon to fall, when he becomes the king of Babylon, now that's the formalization of that message, and then the empowerment would be when he gives the decree. Yes.
So, from my logic thinking, Daniel was given this prophecy before it fulfilled, and he's the one who basically pleaded with the Lord to help him understand how this is going to take place, because the first decree has to do with the last week or the 70 weeks of the captivity. I mean, not the 70 weeks, right? And so Daniel is given that knowledge in Daniel 9. And then in Daniel 10, you see him, he's pleading for it to understand further. So to me, the formalization of the message would happen in Daniel 9. And Cyrus is, because of that knowledge given, the Lord is working upon his heart to make it fulfill.
So Daniel chapter 9, I don't see how you could have that occur. So if you go to your notes, do I have them here? That's right. I got Daniel 11. Okay, yeah, it's the next page, page 59. We have the chronology of Daniel 1 to 10. So Daniel 9, we have, so we're going to discuss this and look at this because these are important points and we don't want to rush through them. Daniel's prayer and the 70-week prophecy. Now this is in the first year of Darius the Mede. So her argument is that Daniel has this prophecy of the 70 weeks in the first year of Darius. So we know Babylon has fallen. So obviously this, what she's saying, it fits in the timeline. And could we say that Daniel 9 is the formalization of the message and not Cyrus coming to the throne? Okay, you guys need to speak up. Yes.
Yeah, I thought it would be Cyrus understanding the prophecies. I thought that was the formalization of the
Well,
message.
and to me, that's part of the same event,
Okay.
right? So when I think about Cyrus coming to the throne, he comes to the throne. It's going to be revealed to him that there's this prophecy about him. Daniel's going to be doing that. But there's still a period of time we don't know exactly when that happens. So I just put Cyrus coming as his accession. But there's a lot of things attached to that accession, right? Yes, Oliver.
The servant of the Lord said that Daniel's deliverance from the lion's den made a great impression upon Cyrus, and that gave him the ability and the opportunity to share with him the prophecies relating to himself,
Yes.
as it relates to. So you can see an increase of knowledge there,
Right.
and that increase of knowledge is relating to Cyrus.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
So you can see that Cyrus is the
yeah, because we have this increase of knowledge, so somehow, however we want to look at it, we have a whole bunch of things occurring there that we can all group together. So we, to say it's the accession of Cyrus isn't quite the right way of looking at it. But we do have Darius and we have Cyrus. All these events are going to be pointing to Cyrus becoming the appointed messenger. Yes.
From my understanding, from what I've read, Daniel 6 and Daniel 9 need to be put together or mixed together. Because Daniel 6 come in, it was actually the cause because of Daniel 6. And Sister White points out that an angel was sent even upon the mind of Darius for him to understand what was happening. I don't know if I'm verbalizing it correct, but I know that an angel was sent upon the mind of Darius too during this event.
Yes, and then we know that from Daniel chapter 11.
Yes, and then shortly after that, or even before that, the Lord is giving him the understanding of what's going to happen to his people. And I think this was before he was even thrown in the lion's den.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know how that affects any of this, but obviously there's all these things together. The point is we do know Cyrus is the one who gives this message to go back to Jerusalem. And the Bible points to him as the Lord's anointed, the Messiah, basically. How we want to distinguish it, we might be able to sort some of that out. We might, because Daniel also has a role. That's pretty obvious. So how we would look at that might be something we could discuss, further on. But in looking at the chronology, we can see now that we definitely have an arrival of formalization and empowerment, and then that empowerment allows them to go back to Jerusalem to first build an altar and then to lay the foundation of the temple, right? So we're following a standard reform line. And then Olivine read the work of the enemies, right? So let's look at the work of the enemies, because this is important in understanding the first 4 verses of Daniel chapter 11 and identifying who these people are that are mentioned here in Ezra chapter 4 that there isn't total agreement upon, but Ellen White actually plainly tells us who these people are. So Ellen White gets all this stuff right. One of the things that allows me to understand that the spirit of prophecy is inspired is the way that Ellen White sorts through all of the garbage that existed in her day, and it still exists, but in her day, all of the nonsense and the different views and opinions on chronology. So Ellen White doesn't get anything wrong. She always gets it right. And she gets it right not just because there's only one view, she gets it right in spite of the fact that there's all these conflicting views about how to interpret the chronology and these verses specifically relating to who these kings are. And you'll find that, reading chronology, like I've read all the old chronologies that were around at the time of Ellen White, all of them, and then a lot of the new chronologies. There's just so much confusion, and Ellen White just sorts through the mess because she has God's Holy Spirit teaching her and guiding her, God's angel guiding her to write these things. Whether she fully understood them herself or not is not really an issue. She has the correct information there in her writings. So when we read about this, we have the work of the enemies. Now, one of the things that happens when they want to start building, it says and I'm just going to read this here, they came to Zerubbabel, right? Okay, I'll read verse 1 to you. Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the children of the captivity builded the temple unto the Lord God of Israel, Ezra 4, verse 1, then they came to Zerubbabel and to the chief of the fathers and said unto them, Let us build with you, for we seek your God as ye do, and we do sacrifice unto him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Ashur, which has brought us up hither. And so we looked at this when we looked at the 2520, and Ellen White specifically says that the 65, well, she doesn't say, she excises the 65-year prophecy, which Miller believed referred to the northern kingdom. She takes it out of page 323 of the Great Controversy, she excises it when she's quoting that paragraph, because the land of northern Israel was depopulated long before 65 years after the fall or the captivity of Hoshea. It was repopulated, though, 65 years later. So in 677 or 678, that time about when Manasseh was taken captive, Esarhaddon, who is the one who took Manasseh captive, he repopulated northern Israel. So northern Israel had been depopulated for a long time, and the land was becoming overrun. And so he brought in these other peoples to populate the land, and they became the Samaritans. And these people here that are saying that Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, he brought us up hither. Yes.
But in Desire of Ages, when dealing with the woman of the well, the servant of the Lord, it's clear that there were Jews, not Jews, but Israelites that had been placed back. So even with the repopulating, the historical account that I read said that animals had started coming in and started, damaging the people, and so they brought in people, Israelites, because they thought then that they would stay, those animals, which they did. And so she says that those people intermarried with the...
Yeah. So there is some Israelites mixed with them. Obviously, even when you depopulate the land, you don't take out everybody, but you take out most of the people. So there would be some Israelites. But for the most part, these aren't Jews. And even the Israelites who would have been around weren't really worshipers of the true God completely, because they were influenced by the false religion of the northern kingdom. So the Samaritans are kind of a mix of things. The Jews never considered them real Jews, even though they might have had some Jewish blood. But the point that she brings up, to understand the Samaritans, they're not just Jews from the northern kingdom. They're people who also came in from different areas of Babylon's empire that were used to repopulate that area. So these people then, of course, Zerubbabel doesn't want them to participate because they're separating themselves from these people, and they don't want false worship to come in. So they say, no, you can't help us. And these people then, it says in verse 5, they hired counselors against them, right? And in verse 4, then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and troubled them in building. So we see that this is the work of the enemies. And it says in verse 5, and hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even unto the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So Darius is going to be our second decree. But there's enemies that are operating in opposition to God's people during this period. And who are the kings that we know? If we're going to line up the kings of Persia, we always know we have Darius, the Mede, we have Cyrus, we have Cambyses, False Smyrtus, Darius the Great, right? Or Hystaspes. So you got another Darius the Persian, you'll say. And then we say in Daniel chapter 11, we're at the time of Cyrus, 3 shall stand up in Persia, and then the 4th will be Xerxes, right? So,
Which one of them is also called Ahasuerus or
okay, that's what we're just going to look at here. So, we have in the reign of Ahasuerus, so this is verse 6, in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, wrote they unto him the accusation. And then it says, in the days of Artaxerxes, wrote Bisham, Mithridath, Tabeel, and so forth. Now, we just know that it started with Cyrus, and then it mentions 2 kings, and one of them it calls Ahasuerus, and the next one it calls Artaxerxes. Now, both of these names are titles. Okay, so they're kind of titles, but they're also names. And kings aren't always just called by one name, they can be called by different names. And different people will call kings from different countries different names than the people themselves often call their kings. So people look at this, they'll say, oh, Ahasuerus, that's in the story of Esther. So they think that that must be the king in the time of Esther. So this is referring to some time after Darius, right? So some people will read this unto the reign of Darius, kings of Persia, and then they will look at these next ones and they will say, well, this Ahasuerus, that must be Xerxes. And then this Artaxerxes is what we call Artaxerxes. That's the way some people interpret these verses, right? Now, I guess I could have just given you the Spirit of Prophecy quote, but she plainly tells us Ahasuerus is Cambyses and Artaxerxes is false Smyrtus. Right? So we have the Spirit of Prophecy that can keep us from that error. And when you look at, there's so much disagreement regarding, even who Ahasuerus is in the book of Esther. Samuel Snow in the Midnight Cry, who did he think, well, I shouldn't say in the Midnight Cry, because we know in his first letter, who did he say was the king in the story of Esther? Does anybody know? He thought it was Artaxerxes, the one who gave the decree in 457. So he places the story of Esther not under Xerxes, but under Artaxerxes in his first letter, which is a mistake. So you can see, at that time, if you read the chronologies and the different commentators, they have all different kinds of views about who's being referred to in these verses.
The Spirit of Prophecy quote that you make mention of is Prophets and Kings, page 572, paragraph 2.
Can you read it, please?
I just have the reference.
Oh, you just have the reference. Okay.
So I'm just giving you
Yeah.
so it
Yeah.
can be placed
So
out
it's
here.
it's
Prophets and Kings.
yeah. So people can look this up. Prophets and Kings, 572,
Yes.
paragraph.
2.
Yeah. So that will tell us who these kings are. But I have run into Facebook people who, Adventists, who argue with me, and I say, Ellen White says this, and I say, Ellen White's wrong, because it doesn't fit with their theory. Yeah, I know. That's what I stop arguing after that. So, so we can see then that we have this chronology of placing these things, that we are guided by the Spirit of Prophecy, and we can now look, at least at this part, we've understood the work of the enemies. So we've understood all the way up to the second angel's message. So if we're going to look at this, I'm going to have to erase part of this. So now we have the first angel's message. So I'm going to erase this history. There are these dates. That was just for a visual to happen here. So we're going to have the decree here, and then so from the decree, then we're going to have the foundations laid, and then we're going to have the work of the enemies, and this is Ezra chapter 4 verses whatever it was 4 onward. And this was Ezra 3 that deals with the laying of the foundation. Now, false Smyrtus is followed by Darius. And false Smyrtus is actually the one who stopped the building of the foundation of the temple. So when would we have the second angel arrive in this history? So we have the work of the enemies. Okay, so let's look at page 62. Now this is the chronology of Haggai and Zechariah. And so we know that Darius comes to the throne, and Darius is going to give the second decree. But most people believe that his decree happens first, and then they start resuming the work of the temple. Ellen White specifically tells us that there's more than 20 years between the first decree and the second decree. And so when you see people talk about this decree, the commencement of the work of the temple, they will often place it in 520 BC, but they'll have Darius' decree right at the beginning. So in Haggai's first vision, so we're not going to have time to go through all this, but Haggai has his first vision on the 6th month and the first day of the month, and that's in Haggai chapter 1, verse 1. And this is in August of 520 BC. So I have here this chart, which I'm not going to draw it on the board because it's too complicated, but it shows that in 522 BC in September, Darius begins to reign. And in the second year of Darius, so you can see in the second year, both Haggai and Zechariah begin prophesying. And this prophesying is telling them to go back and commence the work of completing the temple. So the work of the foundation had been done, but now they're going to start the work of building the temple.
And that is in Prophets and Kings 573, paragraph 3.
Okay, so.
I'd like to make a comment about Patriarchs and Kings. That book was actually finished and put together in 1916, 2 years after Sister White died. And there are some articles that she was written by them that they have Review and Herald.
Yeah, you can find them in the review.
Yeah, and they have just a little slight more details that was some of them were left out when they put in Patriarchs and Kings.
Yeah. Some people don't accept Prophets and Kings because it was, published posthumously. No, she's not saying that, so I'm just clarifying that. She's just saying that we can find in articles in the Review and Herald details that in putting together the book they left out.
And in this chapter as well, the servant of the Lord is clear that they had started working before the decree was given, and she said that God had given them wisdom. When the inquiry came to them, who has given you permission to build? God gave them wisdom in answering, and they said Cyrus had, and it made them Darius give the issue that they should search for that decree, and so in finding them.
Yeah. Yes, Luke?
I think it's 573.3.
573?
Yes.
Yeah.
Here, oh, yeah. Okay, thank you. You'll notice I have lots of typos in my notes. Even though I'm good with numbers, I write them down wrong lots of the times. Now, it is interesting talking about this search because there is a record of this search and where they found. So when Darius is looking for these records, it's not easy for them to find because there had been some events that had changed things, and they find them in a treasure city, and I can't remember the name of the city, but it's a city of record. So it wasn't like they have these records, and a lot of times, some nations, we don't have any of their records because they kept things in one place, and if those records get destroyed, all their records get destroyed. And so anyway, they found them eventually, and it took time to find them, is my point. So even though the enemies came to Darius and said, why are they building? So they start the building first, according to the Bible. it's not like, 2 weeks later he issues a decree. It takes time because they first have to find out where is this decree of Cyrus. And it's not where they think it is. And so it took them time before they can actually find it. And then they have to review it, so they have to bring it back to Darius. He has to review it, and then he's going to issue this decree. And my view, based upon what Ellen White says, based on the fact that it's more than 20 years between the two decrees, but less than 20 years from when they returned to Jerusalem, that the only place we can place it is in the summer of 516 BC. Right? And that, of course, ends, the temple was destroyed in the summer of 586. So from the summer of 586 to the summer of 516 is 70 years. But the temple isn't completed until March 12th, 515 BC. So I don't mark the end of that 70 years of the temple with, as far as Leviticus 26 is concerned, with when the temple is completed. I mark it when the decree occurs 70 years later. But if you did argue that it's 70 years and 7 months when the temple is completed, you can still say that's 70 years. Okay? But it's interesting, these periods of 70 years, Ellen White gives us information to help us mark them specifically. And so to me, it was neat putting this all together, this whole puzzle of all these dates and all of Ellen White's chronology and the Leviticus 26, to see how it all fit together so perfectly. And that she has the statement that helps us place this decree. Because I assumed actually the decree must be in 516 before I saw Ellen White's statement that says it was more than 20 years between the two decrees. So, and she's the only one that I've been able to find who says that. Everybody else places the decree not in the 6th year of Darius, but in the 2nd year of Darius. Everybody. There is no one that I have been able to find who agrees with Ellen White. So she has some information that she obviously never copied from anybody that is very specific, that gives us the correct answer. Yes, Olivia.
Ezra 6, 1 and 2 tells you where the rules were found.
Oh, yes.
Say that again, what was it?
Ezra chapter 6, verses 1 and 2 tells us where the rule.
Yeah. Yeah, it was found at Akmetha. And there's actually, I found this in, and I shouldn't tell you I found things that I can't remember where I found them. But I do have it in a book where they talk about this and the name of the city in Persian names, where this city is. But this is just the Hebrew version of the name of the city, but it is very similar. So there is a record outside of the Bible that tells us about this search. So that's, a really interesting point. But the Bible does tell it. And so it's in the province of the Medes. So the idea, though, is that it did take time. And Ellen White accounts for that, but nobody else seems to. Okay, so we now have then, the second angel arrives. So we just have to say Haggai and Zechariah. Right? So second angel is a doubling, right? We have 2 prophets who are telling them to commence building the temple. And we also have Zerubbabel is here because he comes out of Babylon and he lays the foundation. But Zerubbabel is BB, Zerubbabel, like that. Zerubbabel, because this is Zerub is the word that means to come out of, and Babel is Babylon, right? So his name means to come out of Babylon. And the second angel's message is calling out of Babylon. So Zerubbabel is attached to the second angel's message as well.
Doesn't he also go by Sheshbazzar, which means worshippers of fire? Isn't that his name too also?
I don't know.
Yes, it is.
Yep.
It is? Okay. Okay, so I never knew that.
Ezra 5.
Okay.
We just read it.
Okay, I didn't know that was the same person. So you're saying it's the same person? Okay. Okay, and now we have, so the second angel is going to arrive here. So when is the second angel formalized? Because we're going to have the second angel empowered, and the second message empowered. But you'll go message.
The message of Haggai and Zechariah.
So here it's going to be empowered at Darius's decree. Because at least that's the way I would do it. I could be wrong. Maybe I've thought about this in different ways, because we have the temple is completed and dedicated, and we could say, well, maybe that's the empowerment. We could just say they give a message, the formalization is the actually building it, right? So they're actually completing.
Empowering of it.
You don't?
I would think it
You
is
would think it is?
empowering.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
That's what I was thinking. But we know that the decree actually completes the work, and it's just near the end because they complete it in that same year. So it empowers them to complete that work. And there's probably a lot more detail that we could glean from understanding what happens in that history regarding the temple. But the specific thing that I want to look at here is Ezra chapter 6. And this is in verse 15. So who's ever going to read next? Ezra 6, verse 15. Mario, you're reading?
Are you looking for the finishing of the temple?
It's Ezra 6:15.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we can read verse 14 too. Okay, read verse 14 and 15.
And the elders of the Jews built it, and they prospered through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. And they built it and finished it according to the commandment of the God of Israel, and according to the commandment of Cyrus and Darius and Artaxerxes king of Persia. And this house was finished on the 3rd day of the month Adar, which was in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king.
Okay, so there's some things here that are important little details. So the temple is completed under the reign of Darius. So why does Ezra mention Artaxerxes here? Why does he mention the 3rd decree even though he's talking about the time of the 2nd decree? Because this confuses people. Many Adventists, and actually I would say 99.9% of Adventists I talk to, all believe that the temple is completed and built after 457 BC, right? We know that the temple was completed in 515 BC, but they take this verse here and they just don't think about the context of it. They just say Cyrus, Darius, Artaxerxes. Now Ellen White says all 3 decrees are needed for the originating, affirming, and completion of the specifications of the prophecy to start the 70 weeks. So Ezra is now mentioning Artaxerxes because he sees all 3 decrees as important, and he is writing after this time, right? So he's writing after the decree of Artaxerxes. But he's not telling you that Artaxerxes' decree was given before the temple was finished, right? He's just telling that he's telling you about something that happens much later. Artaxerxes' decree actually doesn't have a lot to do with the temple. They do some decorating of the temple, but the temple is completed and functional and operational under the 2nd decree. Now we will see this in when it says here in verse. So they have the temple completed, and it's completed in the 12th month. So it says Adar. Adar is the 12th month, and if you have a 13th month, it's called V-Adar or 2nd Adar. And then the first month follows the 12th or the 13th, depending whether it's a leap month or not. In this year, there is no leap month. It just goes from, so we're going to have the temple completed here. So this is the 3rd day of the 12th month. And on our calendar, it's the 12th day of the 3rd month. So I would call this March 12th, 515 BC. But I would call this the 3rd day of the 12th month of the Jewish year, 516 BC. to confuse people. No, that's not why. Because it's still that year is not ended until the next month, right? Which is the first month. And notice that it's an inversion. The 12th month and the third day and the third day, or the 12th day in the third month and the third day in the 12th month. And I thought that was interesting when I noticed this a couple of years ago. We're going to see it's much more significant than I imagined, because we're going to see that there's a connection between the Jewish calendar, dates on the Jewish calendar, and their significance on our calendar, the dates on our calendar. That is, the numbers of these dates and how we've chosen to write these dates, to write them in this order, you know, the day and the month, like that, I believe is in God's design. God's hand is in this movement, and how He's forced us, because I didn't usually write the dates this way. I came to adopt writing dates like this because of how other people were writing them, and it's really significant. You will see later, that's like Thursday and Sabbath. We will look at that. But here we have, this is the dedication of the temple, and we're going to see that this is going to line up with some of Samuel Snow's letters later on, so you're going to see why it's significant. So you have the dedication of the temple. So if we read then in verse 19, so Mario, do you want to read that? Yeah, it's chapter 6.
And the children of the captivity kept the Passover upon the 14th day of the first month.
Okay, so the next event that occurs is the 14th day of the first month. And this is now, if we're going to date this, this would be Jewish year 515 BC, because it's a new year. Does that make sense? So we just passed into a new Jewish year. And this is 1 month and 11 days later. Okay? Now, is it 1 month and 11 days later? You have a comment?
I have a question.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever taken in consideration or if you figure out why this book of Ezra is written in Aramaic and in Hebrew. For example, the verses that I've read, they're in Aramaic, and the verse brother just read that actually it's in Hebrew. Have you ever to figure out the distinction between the two languages applied to describe this history?
No.
Okay.
So, now, is it 11 days? I just said it's 1 month and 11 days. Is it? It's a trick question, sort of. But I want you to think about it. Because how do we count days? When I count days, how do I generally count them? You know, like I've been here now for 14 days, and I got 12 days until I get home, you know, to see my wife. So, you know, we're counting down the days. So, if we look at this, how do we count this? So 1 month would bring us to where? So it'd be third day. Now, if I'm on the third day, I could count 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, right? Right, so I could count it as 12 days. If I counted the third day as 1. No, I wouldn't say I wouldn't. I wouldn't. But the Jews often do count that way. And so sometimes when we're counting, and we're going to see this, we have to start with that day as 1, not as 0, right? And what's
I
that?
missed it. You do the fingers again, I missed it.
So I'm starting with the 3 as 1. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So that's 12 days. Okay. So, you know, so I write in my notes, it's 1 month and 11 days, I believe. But I started thinking about it, and there's a symbolism in these numbers. So if I go 12 days in 1 month, what is that? Anybody know what that is? Well, that's a date, right? You can make this as a date. I can take a count and make it as a date. And that's the day that they leave the river Ahava in 457. And so we're going to be doing some of these things where we'll see that when we take account of something, it can actually become a date. And we can add these things together. You'll see what I'm talking about. And It's really, really fascinating. But we can see that these numbers, the way that we write these things, 3rd day, 12th month, they become significant in how we look and analyze Samuel Snow's letters, because all of the dates in Samuel Snow's letters, whether when they're written, published, or republished, all have significance on the Jewish calendar or on our calendar as it relates to the Jewish calendar. And it's absolutely fascinating puzzle. It's something that is impossible for a man to construct. You couldn't make it up if you tried. It's just way too complex. Yet there is a simplicity in it of, once you see it, of how these things work. So that's why I'm bringing up these dates. They're very significant dates and important. And we're going to see that these two dates, the 3rd day of the 12th month in 1844 and the 14th day of the 1st month, how they follow each other in Millerite history is extremely important, because it's going to deal with that Passover. And in understanding sunset, or the point before midnight, or whatever it is we're looking at that we're trying to sort out, the Passovers that happened in 1844, both the Jewish Passover and the correct Passover according to biblical reckoning, these two Passovers are tied together. And they're tied by this history, the dedication of the temple, and then the first Passover in this new temple. Yeah.
It points out right here, for the priests and the Levites were purified together and killed the Passover for all the children of the captivity. Seems like here they're not individually do it, but they did it. The priests and the Levites did it for all the children of Israel.
Okay. Yes. So
Before they were individually were
yeah,
doing
because
the
there
same.
wasn't a great number of people here at this time. You know, I mean, there's not a million Jews in Jerusalem. But yes. So it says here that the priest killed the Passover for everyone.
It's verse 20.
Yeah, verse 20.
6:20.
Yes, Brittany.
On the chart you have the 3rd day of the 12th month for the 6th year and 515, but you put 516.
I know, because I'm trying to be more specific. It's the same year. It's just on the Jewish year, 3rd day of the 12th month is still the Jewish year 516 that started in the spring of 516.
Okay.
Right? On our calendar, we would call it 515. So I'm trying to distinguish that. It's in the year 515 BC. If we put it on our calendar, it's March 12th, 515 BC. But the Jewish year, so just to clarify this, here we have the year 516 BC. And in our year 516 BC, we would have March 12th here, right? But the Jewish year, or pardon me, this is 515 BC, right? The Jewish year, 515 BC, is here, but their 516 BC starts over here. This is 516. This starts in the spring. So this is the 12th day of the 3rd month. It's at the end of their year 516 BC.
So the calendar of Aramaic calendar is ahead of the Jewish 6 months.
Their calendar is 3 months behind ours, if you're going to spring. Our 515 starts on January 1st.
What do you mean ours? What do you mean by ours?
This is our calendar.
Is that the Jewish calendar?
That's our calendar.
Dorian.
That's the Julian calendar
Or Julian.
here, because it's
Okay.
in BC dates. Right, this is the Julian calendar. This is January 1st, and theirs is starting over here in the end of March. So their calendar in that year is starting sometime in March.
Okay, so then let me rephrase my question. When we're dealing in here, this history, is there a distinction between the Aramaic calendar and the Jewish calendar
No.
when they're in captivity?
No, if you're talking about the Babylonian calendar,
Yes.
the Babylonian calendar has some differences between the Jewish calendar. The months start at the same time. The only difference is that the Babylonians can add a leap month after the 6th month of the year. The Jews never do. Their leap month is always the 13th, but they can have a second Elulu. Elulu is the 6th month, and they can have a second 6th month on the Babylonian calendar. Yes.
It ends in March. Why do we mark April 19th, first day of the month?
Because in different years, the beginning of the year is going to start on different dates. The span is about a 30-day span from when you can have the first day of the first month start, because it starts with the moon. And so you can have the first day of the first month, the earliest that you can have it. And it also gets confusing here because when you go back in your Julian calendar, it's different slightly in number of days from our calendar. But the earliest that you can have it is after the spring equinox. So the first day of the first month always occurs after the spring equinox. So the earliest you could have it on our calendar is March 22nd. That would be the earliest. And then, but the latest you could have it is if it would be, April 19th actually is the latest that you can have it. So the latest you can have a year start is April 19th. And the earliest you can have it is March 22nd, yes.
I'm really bad with this calendar stuff. Which calendar do you have on your page right here? Which calendar? Is it Gregorian or Jewish?
So when I'm on this page, these pages here, I always just put our calendar for the BC dates. So I wasn't consistent in when I did this. I'm just putting it all, the date always, when it says March 31st, 536, I'm always using our calendar. But if I'm using a Jewish date, like the 12th day of the 3rd month, I should be putting the date on the year based upon that calendar. So if I was going to be consistent, because I'm taking the 12th day of the 3rd month, right? Pardon me, I did this backwards. Did I do that backwards? This is the 3rd day of the 12th month, right? So this is the 12th month on the Jewish calendar. So the 12th month is still in this year on the Jewish calendar, right? These numbers are our numbers, right? So if this is a year, an ecclesiastical year, their religious calendar, their next year isn't going to start till the first day of the first month.
So
Yeah, I did that.
You switch the 5:15 to 5.
This is correct. So this is our calendar.
No, you put
The 12th day, so this is March 12th. March 12th,
5:16.
5:15, that's our calendar. This is the Jewish calendar, 3rd day of the 12th month, 5:16. Yes, so I had that backwards. So, okay, but thanks. I know, is it help? Are you getting it? Yeah. It's kind of fun, this chronology stuff. But yeah, it can be a bit confusing. But we just need to know that our calendar is different than the Jewish calendar, that we're not following, because when the Millerites, and we talked about this, when the Millerites first looked at the year 1843, William Miller understood that the year 1843 began on January 1st and ended December 31st. And when did he first present the idea that the Jewish year began in the spring? Before or after this chart was made? After, because this chart was made in May, and it was in December of 1843 that he first says, or 1842, pardon me, that he first says that the Jewish year begins in the spring of 1843. And at first he said March 21st, right? He was just looking at the equinox itself. He wasn't thinking about how the Jewish calendar works. And so in that time, they start to really look at the calendar. So in the year 1843, they start to look at the calendar, and they start to understand the Jewish calendar, and then they even start introducing this idea of the Karaite calendar before, Samuel Snow isn't the first one who introduces it. Other people started talking about it. And so by 1844, they now understand that the Jewish year ends on the last day, which is April 18th. 1844. The last day of the Jewish year is April 18th. And then the first day of the first month is April 19th, But it took them time to understand that. And even sometimes at first, they would have the first day of the first month is April 18th, because they just used the conjunction. They didn't think about the sighting of the new moon. Yes.
So in that particular year, you were just talking about how that the earliest you could have the first day of the first month could be March 22nd, or the latest would be April 19th.
Yeah.
So
in our calendar, present calendar.
In our present calendar.
Their
so
equinox kind of shifts a bit. So, you know, if anybody's Ukrainian, you know that you have a calendar. They're still using the Julian calendar, and the Julian calendar shifts. Every 128 years, it shifts one day from the Gregorian.
My point is with the Millerites, they were actually, the first day of the first month then was actually
March
the late-
21st.
It was March 21st.
Was the
in their
first,
year?
and then, well, that was when they first thought it was. which
Right, but
wouldn't
when
work.
did they actually realize it was? It was April
April 19th.
April 19th.
It
which is
wasn't
the
until
latest that
just,
it could
it was right around that time that they figured it out.
be. Right, but you're talking about the span of when it could be?
Yeah.
And in the year the Millerites were
It's the
figuring this out,
latest.
it was the latest.
It's
That's
the latest.
my point.
Yeah.
Okay. all right.
Actually, Joshua Himes points out that actually the point that the date they were looking for was April 14. That's the day that they were looking for Jesus to come. He has it in May in the book. And
Yeah,
that put on
yeah.
May.
There's different times, different people at different times chose different dates. There's no consistency. They had all different theories. Some of them are even looking at a Passover when he comes. Some are looking at the end of the Jewish year, because some were looking at the Passover because Jesus died on the Passover, and so there was different views, and it took them time to come to the idea that it was the first day of the first month was April 19th. But we know that the Jewish calendar from the first day of the first month to the 10th day of the seventh month is always 187 days.
Yes.
And October 22nd, if it's the 187th day, and you count backwards, you come to April 19th. But all the Millerites didn't fully understand the calendar, even during the midnight cry. Different people had different understandings, but they all, because some were trying to have the date October 21st, some were looking at October 23rd, some were looking at October 22nd. We just kind of give this idea, it was all this, everybody understood October 22nd. It took time till they came to that date, and that was just before October 22nd that they finally settled on that date. Yes, Tanya.
Brother Dwayne shared with me that William Miller was using Ferguson's chronology, and that Samuel Smith was using a William Hale's. And there are other people, so there are different chronology being used. That's why you have so many different dates at the final point.
And different ways of understanding the calendar. And one thing that we have found in how we understand the calendar now is correct, because it affirms all these different histories and all these different dates and brings them all together. So I believe that we have come to the correct understanding of the Hebrew calendar, the biblical calendar. And it differs from the Karaite calendar in a lot of different places. So I try to avoid saying the Karaite calendar, even though that's what they believe they were using. Samuel Snow really wasn't using the Karaite calendar. And that's another issue. But some people will object to that because they believe that they were. But the Karaite calendar does a number of things that are quite different than the biblical calendar. And if we use the Karaite calendar, we would not, it would contradict Ellen White's statement that the Pentecost is always 50 days after the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread is always on the 16th. Because in the Karaite calendar, the Pentecost is always on a Sunday. And so, you know, Ellen White does not use the Karaite calendar for every aspect of it. The only thing that we would say is that starting the year, in a sense, they're using ideas that they got from the Karaites, that they could start the Passover 1 month later than the Jews, because the Jews kept the Passover differently. And so we're going to look at that further. So we've got through the first and second decree, the chronology of that. So tomorrow we're going to look at the third decree and some other things related to that. So the third decree is really, really important because the dates in it are really interesting. So we're going to look at the chiasms that happen in 457. So those are going to be interesting. So let's close with prayer. I'll just close. Dear Father in heaven, we're thankful for the time we had here this morning to look at these things that are very puzzling. And we know that our minds don't grasp everything that is in your word, and we definitely don't grasp all of the significance of these dates. But we just ask, Lord, that your Spirit can be with us throughout this day, and that we cannot be discouraged by the things that we don't understand, but that we can be encouraged by the light that is shining upon us. I ask, Lord, that you can help us and help me as we go through the next parts of these chronologies, that we can have a greater clarity and understanding, that we can see why you have done things this way and why you have unfolded light in the manner that you have. And we pray for each person here that you can be with us throughout this day, that you can watch over us, that you can send your angels around us, and that you can speak to us and teach us, and that we can hear your voice and be obedient. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.